Morning everybody, welcome back to Indycar on a very wet Thursday morning here in Maryhill this morning. Today's show is a little heads up, actually, a little advert for another friend of mine who's about to launch a new television show this evening. His name is Dr. Mark McNaught, and Mark, for those of you who don't know him, has been writing on the subject of Scottish independence since about 2013. When he became interested in what was happening in Scotland before the first referendum. Now, Mark is the Assistant Professor of Political Science, American Studies and Philosophy at the University of Rennes in France. And he has been, for the past few years, considering how best to write a constitution for the new Scottish state. Now, I met Mark recently, a few weeks ago in fact, in the West End, and had a look at the draft constitution that he's prepared. Pardon me. And we had a very wide-ranging discussion about the various aspects of Scottish life which need to be incorporated into such a document. Many of you will be aware of the history of the Scottish Constitution as it stands at the moment, and know probably that it was based on a document called the Declaration of Arbroath, which dates from the 13th century. And this was the very first declaration of a unified Scottish state under the auspices of a single king, who was, rather than being appointed by hereditary or birthright, was in fact appointed by the people and could be removed by the people if they did not feel their ruler was being effective or was supporting them or was protecting them properly. And this was the very first effort at in the whole of the Western world, basically, at the beginnings of democracy, at the beginnings of the sovereignty of people over the sovereignty of a monarch. Now, to this day, the Scottish state remains sovereign only to its people. And in fact, the Queen, who is the nominal head of state of Scotland, is in fact Queen Elizabeth I of Scotland. She's Queen Elizabeth II of England, but there was never a Queen Elizabeth I of Scotland, and people forget this. So she is Queen Elizabeth I of Scotland, but only by dint of our permission as the sovereign people of Scotland. Our agreement is the only thing which keeps her on the throne and the head of state of Scotland. Now, to bring this back to the present day, this evening Mark McNaught's programme begins at 7:30. This is Mark's first ever broadcast on a live stream, and the boys at Independence Live, David McGowran and Kevin Gibney over in Govan, are putting the show together and helping to produce it. So it should be reasonably professional, and I hope you'll enjoy what Mark has to say. I don't want to give you too many spoilers on this, because the purpose of the programme is for open discussion, and not just from independence campaigners, but from anybody who is interested in the future of the Scottish state. Now, a written constitution, is a glaring absence in the United Kingdom at the moment. As you probably know, the British constitution, in inverted commas, is a kind of amorphous thing. It has no written document. The only document that was written down was the Domesday Book, and it really just catalogued what was happening at the time. There is also the Magna Carta, which in English law was the beginnings of the state. However, there is no written constitution which declares anything at all. And most of the British constitution, if you want to call it that, the constitution of the United Kingdom, is in fact just based on historical precedent. In other words, things that have happened in the past that have been written down and have gradually become law or part of the fabric of society. But there are very few guarantees in the British constitutional setup, and there are so many loopholes that virtually anything can be rewritten at any time, which gives governments a huge amount of control over the people, and the people absolutely no control over the government. Anyway, hopefully Mark will explain to you how his version of a constitution will guarantee the rights of every person living in Scotland. And those rights will be basic things like the right to a home, the right to food, the right to water, the right to a job or a means of support, the right to benefits and help when we're unable to work. All of these things in a constitutional sense would be guaranteed to every citizen, and they would not be able to be abolished by government. There would have to be huge debate across the country about changing any fact in the Constitution. You might be aware that the American state has a written constitution. You might have heard of people taking the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment to the American Constitution is a statement that says a person does not have to incriminate themselves. And America has a very cleverly written constitution, and it means that whatever happens to you as a citizen in America, you have the right under the Constitution to defend yourself from any kind of action against you which is unconstitutional. And this is what Scotland needs as a state. It needs guarantees for the people who live here, it needs guarantees for the businesses that set up here, and it needs guarantees of the way people are treated in general. So that's what Mark's programme is going to look at, and it's a part of a series of programmes. I may be wrong here, but I'll check with Mark, but I believe he's doing 6 episodes of this particular show where he looks at different aspects of the constitutional framework that Scotland needs to become a state on its own again. In other words, once it's separated itself from the United Kingdom. So that all happens tonight at 7:30 on Independence Live. I hope you'll tune in tonight and support Mark in his brave attempt at his first live stream. And I know how nerve-wracking that can be, having done it myself for the first time only last May. So good luck to Mark tonight. The other little piece of information I wanted to give you today is about what happened yesterday. There was a rumour that went around in the last 3 days from a number of interesting and usually reliable sources that Nicola Sturgeon was going to make some kind of announcement yesterday. And all that actually appeared was an article in The National which said that Theresa May had been told that it would be the Scottish people who would decide when and whether there was a referendum, and not the Tory party and not the United Kingdom government. Now, this is an interesting statement, but it's not news, and in fact I believe the meeting that they had took place a few days ago. So I'm sorry for those of you who were disappointed that there wasn't an announcement yesterday. But on reflection, looking at the situation as it is at the moment, you might remember that there is going to be a transitional period after the 29th of March 2019, which is the official start of Brexit. It's when the UK has actually left the EU. However, and this is the big however, from that date for 21 months, the UK will still remain a member of the EU. And as it's a member for those 21 months only, Scotland and its Parliament are still protected by the European Union, by its laws, by its institutions, by its Court of Human Rights, and by the Council of Europe. Now, this is an interesting fact because it means that in terms of the countdown clock to an Indy Ref 2, it means we've got 21 months more than we thought we had. So in other words, what I've been saying to you over the last few weeks is wrong, because we don't need to have our independence referendum in September of this year, although I would prefer it to be early like that. But the possibility of having it later is now a reality, because as long as the Scottish Parliament is still protected under European conventions and European laws, the UK government is not able to remove powers from Holyrood, or to remove all powers from Holyrood and disband it and wind it up. They can't do that. So the interesting situation now is that we have more time in which to look at what happens with Brexit. Now, as far as I'm aware, there will be meetings of the various European countries, the 27 other nations. The UK at the moment is trying to make its pitch, to put its pitch together for what it would like to have as a future trading arrangement. But as I've mentioned in the past, there are problems with this because there are only really 3 options open to the UK. One of them is the so-called Norwegian model. This is the one where we are trading as part of a small group with a European Free Trade agreement, but not with any powers to do anything else, just simply to trade into and out of the common market. That will not probably include any kind of customs union at the moment, because A customs union requires the free movement of people, and this is something of a red line. Now, the Tories, remember, are being driven by the right wing of the Tory party. David Davis, who is, I would call him a soft Brexiteer, a man who's been trying to negotiate a soft Brexit, is hanging by a thread in terms of his ability to keep going as a negotiator. The right wing of the Tory party want him out, and they want the hardest Brexit possible. So there is an argument and a battle going on within the Conservative Party, and because of that argument, it's likely that we will end up with a much harder Brexit than we hoped for. So the options for Britain are gradually narrowing down to either a Canadian model, which is, again, limited access to the European markets with no customs union, but a payment is necessary to make that happen. It's quite a large fee to make that happen, and it takes a long time to negotiate such a deal. Or we leave the European Union with nothing, and we have to go out and renegotiate 80 or 90 different trade agreements with European countries or with other countries outside of the EU. Now, it could be that the Tories win this battle, the right wing of the Tory party wins this battle, and Britain is taken completely out of Europe without any trading agreement whatsoever, and ends up having to trade under World Trade Organization rules. And those would mean high taxes on imports coming into the UK and high taxes being imposed on exports from the UK into Europe. In either case, it means that we are going to lose between 10 and 25% of our export orders, and that will hit a lot of big businesses very hard indeed. So things are getting interesting, but the point I'm trying to make in this part of the broadcast is that we have 21 months longer than we expected in which to pitch our own independence campaign at the time when Britain is exiting Europe. Now, if you think about the timing of this just for one moment, in that 21-month period, Britain is trying to remove itself from Europe. It's trying to renegotiate its position in Europe for trade. If Scotland were to leave the United Kingdom at that precise time, when all of the powers are swirling around between Westminster and Brussels, it's perfectly possible at that moment, in fact it might even be the best time to do it, to take back all the powers to Scotland that are due, because that's the moment when it is easiest for those powers and laws to be brought back to the Scottish Parliament and given back to the Scottish Government. Now, what I'm saying here is that it would be an opportune moment while the British Government is disentangling itself from Europe for Scotland to disentangle itself from Britain, because at that moment lawyers and civil servants are going to be scurrying about in all directions, pulling all of these powers back from Europe into and writing them into British law. And if at the same moment Scotland has voted yes to independence, then those laws would simply not be retained at Westminster. Those that pertain to Scotland, particularly our fishing grounds, our oil, everything that belongs in Scottish territory would be repatriated during the same process that is used for Brexit. Now, it makes it very difficult for the British government, obviously. They probably don't want to do this. But in terms of the opportune moment for those powers to move from London to Edinburgh, it's the ideal time, because they're already in motion, they're already in flux, it's already changing. And so because they've been liberated from Europe already, they're passing through Westminster, we can then demand that while they're passing through Westminster that we have them all back, because Britain at that point will have them all there in Westminster and will be deciding which ones they want to keep from Scotland. If Scotland has already voted to leave the United Kingdom by a legal, mandated advisory referendum, whether London agrees to it or not makes no difference. It's a legal, lawful referendum for a country to have. But if we vote yes, then we can demand all of those powers back, and there is nothing in international law that the United Kingdom could do to stop that, because we would have demonstrated as a nation by majority vote that we want those powers back, and now is the perfect time to have them back, while the government is removing the remaining laws from Europe that would effectively come back to Scotland anyway. That's the perfect time. So these are obviously my own opinions, but putting things together like this was what I like to do. and I try and present these as opportunities to you so that you can see the future and how it could work. So tune in tonight to Mark's constitutional programme at 7:30 on Independence Live, and afterwards interact with Mark, give your opinion on his work so far. He's quite happy to take criticisms and also to incorporate new ideas into the framework and into the constitution draft that he's writing. It would be fantastic if Mark has a prepared constitution which has been contributed to by all of the Yes campaigners, so that can be presented as a prototype to the Scottish Government, so that when we are independent we have something to start with that can be written into law. It could even become an interim or temporary constitution until a broader constitution is actually written into law. So a lot of exciting things can happen, but as I said, this 21 months of grace, if you like, this 21-month period when Scotland is still protected and Britain is still in the UK, will give us a little bit of breathing space to extract our own powers from Westminster and repatriate them back into the independent Scotland that we want. So I can see a time frame for this, and I believe that the SNP sees this time frame as well, and that's why they haven't announced anything this week, because they don't need to do it yet. There are still a few things which need to play out. We need to see how hard the Brexit is going to be. There will be a point of no return when the British government is told by Europe what they can have. And as soon as Europe says this is all you can get, then we know how hard Brexit will be, and then is the time that we start the campaign for India F2 and for us to liberate ourselves from the mess that Brexit is about to leave the United Kingdom in. That's all I have to say on this broadcast today. I'm sorry it's been a little bit longer than I planned, but as I say, tune in to Mark's show tonight, 7:30, Independence Live, and let Mark know what you think of his draft constitution. I'll talk to you all later. Have a good day. Bye for now.